Greetings, good people. Welcome to the channel. So today I just wanted to do a video talking a bit about my book and how and why I wrote it and kind of what it's about at a high level. So I wrote this between 2021 and 2024. I released it on April 1st of 2024, designed to coincide with Fool's Day, as I was going for this theme of a fool's wisdom. The reason I came up with the title that I did was because some years ago, I came to the realization that I myself am, in fact, a fool. And it was a very liberating and empowering realization because I'd been taking myself like super seriously because I had this like scientific background and I was, making all this music, which, was very technical, very heady music, very sort of scientific in my approach to it. But I realized, of course, professionally, I'm a hired entertainer. I'm paid to go on stage and dance around and sort of play the fool and like help others to relax and loosen up and forget about their worries and strife and so on. So I was literally a professional fool. Though, people use the word fool in a derogatory sense to mean like stupid or dumb. It's actually, in an archetypal sense, is something much bigger and more nuanced. And, you have the jester, of course, like comics and comedians and tricksters would be the fool, but also people who play, like musicians and actors, dancers, even sports people. They are all fools because they play professionally and most people work, right? And the world is a very serious place, right, where really terrible stuff happens and there's all kinds of things to worry about and things that need to be done and a huge amount of pressure from the world to conform and work and get in line and do what you're told. So someone who just plays is a fool. And we need them. We need fools in society to help us relax and help us see another side of things. But the fool is also associated with the contrarian. And I always find myself a bit of a contrarian as well, in the sense of not just disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing, but I just found my perspective was always at odds with the commonly held worldviews. And so I found myself like quite disagreeable over the years, and particularly in regards to science. Now, when you are going against the grain, people call you a fool all the time. If you try to say to people, oh, the authorities are wrong, they call you a fool, right? Because, what kind of fool doesn't believe the authorities? So I'd been called a fool like all throughout my life, and not just for having opinions that were against the grain, but for all the things I did in my life, like quitting a decent job to go full time making music and DJing. And people told me it was foolish, but I did it, and it worked out good. I went to Honduras for 6 months with my family. Again, people told me it was foolish, and it was, but it worked out good. And there's been many times throughout my life where everyone else has been saying you're a fool for doing this, but for me, I just felt like I had to do it. And of course, the fool is the first card in the tarot deck. Well, it's the zero card, technically, so it corresponds with the Joker in the standard playing cards. And the major arcana is like the journey of the fool, from being a fool to being a wise man, from being, this innocent, sort of open-hearted, playful character going through all these different stages and attaining like wisdom and knowledge of the world. like a true knowledge of the world. So I find myself really relating to this character of the fool, and really knowing myself to be a fool on a deep, deep level. Um, but I also knew I had some wisdom. There's a saying: "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool," and that's from Shakespeare. And you know, I think this happened with this realization that I'm a fool. I I kind of attained a kind of wisdom at the same time, because everything just started to make sense. They say to know thyself, right? And it was like when I realized that was what I am, and that is how I've been throughout my whole life. Um, it just came with a huge amount of clarity. A lot of things started to make sense, and it was much more than I could really express in terms of, like, social media or blog posts or anything. I knew I had to write an entire thesis. So I did. And this is, it's a very comprehensive book. It covers a lot of ground. Um, and yeah, it took me about 2.5 years to write it. And, even though I got the PhD in theoretical physics, and you would think someone with a PhD in theoretical physics is not a fool, but actually, it's an incredibly foolish thing to do, because there's no applications of theoretical physics in the world. Like, there's no jobs, as I found out when I left. Nobody needs it, right? So it's like, why would you go and get a PhD in a subject that nobody needs? That's kind of a foolish thing to do as well. So um, anyway, it took me about 20 years after the PhD to realize just how really useless a lot of that stuff is. And so, there's a lot of challenges to physics in this book, but not just physics, also chemistry and biology, essentially all of modern science, which is actually based on physics theories. They go back to like the 15th, 16th century and so on. So I was just coming at it purely from a scientific point of view. I was reading back through my physics books and physics notes, and going over all the different things that they claim and the proofs and all that. And I was finding that it just didn't stand up to scrutiny, and there was always like a much simpler explanation than what we were given. A lot of these physics proofs are actually like, they're more like magic tricks. They just do this like funny little experiment, and then they tell you that's, they explain it, and that's that. They don't give you any other alternative. But when I started researching alchemy, which is obviously much older and like precedes all modern science, I found alchemy was able to explain everything in much more simple and basic terms than what physics was. And it just rendered the physics explanations completely obsolete. I just realized you don't actually need to talk about these things when you're talking about reality and how things work. You don't actually need to invoke physics a lot of the time, because it was all understood perfectly well before physics was even invented. So there's a lot of criticisms to modern science in the first half of this book. So it's a book of two halves, really: science conspiracies and the secret art of alchemy. I wanted to teach people about alchemy primarily, but in order to do that effectively, I had to first show what the problems are with the modern worldview, because actually the modern science is completely occult alchemy. They've like hidden it, and they tell you that it's a bunch of like superstitious medieval nonsense. But what actually happened there is something much more sinister. So there was a conspiracy, there is a conspiracy, to take the human soul out of science. And this was brilliantly exposed by Webster Tarpley in his presentation, The Venetian Conspiracy. It's on YouTube. It's well worth checking out. He goes into all the key players and everything and exactly how they did it. These Venetian oligarchs, they were opposed to scientific discovery in all its forms. They were like the enemies of science, but they were particularly adamant that the human soul did not exist. So that basically there was no immaterial part to the human being at all. It's just matter. There's no like soul or consciousness that lives on after death. And they were absolutely like, fanatical about this. And they set about infiltrating the scientific establishment and, hiding and banning and occulting sciences which were centered around the human soul. And that's alchemy and astrology, which is, alchemy would be the ancient science of Earth and astrology, the ancient science of the stars. But they are both centered around the human soul. So they wanted the human soul removed from science. So they hide alchemy and astrology, and they infiltrated the scientific establishment and installed a materialistic, atomistic, mechanical, deterministic, godless worldview, right? Which is what we're taught in school today. And this has been upheld and sustained through various compromised organizations and institutions, shall we say. And essentially the science that we are fed, a lot of it, not all of it, I mean, we do learn a lot of practical, real science at school as well. But, when it comes to theoretical stuff, it's well out there, and has no practical application in the real world, which I go into great depth on all this in the book. It's a bit of a tricky one to go into on YouTube, the science conspiracies, because YouTube is known to ban people and censor people for criticizing science, which is pretty lame because in my view, science should be criticized and questioned and challenged intensely. And if we've learned anything from the last 4 years, right, it's like you can't trust science implicitly, right? You've got to challenge it and rebuke it and really question it as hard as we can, because by doing so, it actually makes it stronger. You see, it stops the bull crap from rising up, right? When you're constantly holding it to account. But platforms like YouTube and a lot of others are, at the behest of their advertisers and sponsors and stuff who are heavily invested in bad science. And so they cancel people for talking too much about the science conspiracies. So that's why I really wanted to put it in a book so I can get it out there and people can read all about it without it getting banned or whatever. Now, alchemy, on the other hand, YouTube and stuff don't seem to have any problem with, even though alchemy has been hidden from the public for a long, long time. It's hidden, but it's not censored, if that makes sense. So you can buy alchemy books in the stores. There's loads of alchemy videos on YouTube now. A lot of old books which are now made into audiobooks that you can check out on YouTube. There's tons of good alchemy content. I've never seen it get shadow banned or censored or anything. So there's not really active censoring of alchemy. It's just that the mainstream will never tell you about it, right? You're not going to learn about it in school. It's there's not going to be a documentary about it on Netflix, right? Although there are some shows about alchemy, usually coming from the East, things like the last Avatar, the Last Airbender, and Full Metal Alchemist and stuff. They're kids shows, but they are written by people who know all about alchemy, and they write a lot of the secrets into those scripts. So yeah, alchemy is not censored, but it is sort of hidden, but it's hidden in plain sight. The minute you start looking for it and researching for it, you're just going to find more and more and more, and enough to keep you going for a long, long time. So yeah, that's really what the book is about. First half, debunking modern science. Second half, unveiling the ancient science of alchemy. It's been really well received, and I get a lot of love for this every single day, people writing to me all the time. So yeah, I'm really happy with how it's turned out. There's still some typos in there. I'm currently working on getting it tightened up a bit more. I'll put another edition out at some point, but otherwise it's doing good. So yeah, if you've read it, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy it. If you give me a 5-star review on Amazon, I'll give you the audio book version for free. There's an audiobook as well, narrated by me also. All right, well, have a great day. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this and are looking to dive deeper into alchemy and natural philosophy, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.